And with the GE regime, things began to get really tight for me. I'm the only independent reporter in commercial television. Everybody else is on staff. Everybody follows the rules. In my community center downtown with my wife and training high school students. It were two different worlds. And so when the bell started ringing around the world, it wasn't me that got to go answer it. And the first Gulf War is about ready to start. I've got my hand in the air. You know, by this time, I'm a pretty seasoned war reporter. I was terrible in the beginning, but I've been to a lot of wars by this particular point. And when I'm watching the early videotapes where the generals are up there with their pointer, and every missile precisely hits its target, and they ask the general, had there ever been one missile that didn't hit its target? And he says, no, absolutely perfect accuracy, and there's nobody dying in this war, there's no blood, and everything looks like a TV game. I said, this isn't right. This isn't like any war that I've ever seen. They said, sit down, John. This isn't your war. Stay home. But when the bombing in Baghdad started, all the correspondents left except Peter Arnett. And this created a vacuum. And I said to NBC, I can get in. And I didn't know if I could or not, but I told them I could. And they said, well, if you can get in, go. So we arrive in Baghdad. Peter Arnett was very unhappy to see us. I mean, you in the news business know how competitive it is. He's there by himself, and he knows who we are. The censorship in Iraq at that time was the most severe that I'd ever encountered. When you come in, they hand you 3 pages of rules. You can't shoot from a moving car. You can't turn your camera on without permission. You can't turn it off without permission. You can't shoot military buildings. You can't shoot governmental workers. You can't shoot mosques. You couldn't shoot anything. And Peter Arnett was doing live reports, mostly just stand-ups in the garden, and didn't leave the hotel. Had a censor sitting there next to him. And he certainly wasn't, he's a great reporter. Very, very brave and courageous. He knows how to dig his heels in all sorts of war situations. But he wasn't going to get himself kicked out of Iraq. And we wanted to break those rules. And it took us 3 days, and finally we figured out through secret coughs and all sorts of tricks that we had learned over the years how to shoot what was really happening in Iraq. And after 3 days, we had broken, I would say, every single rule on that paper and had very good documentation that this was not a war without blood. This was a real war where people died and people suffered. And when we go to war, it's important for the American people to know what's happening. So this is an example of the report that we filmed in Baghdad.
This is my house. This is my brother's house.
Uh-oh, another air raid starting. Can you hear the siren?
Yes, I hear.
Was anyone hurt in your family?
No. Just wounded. 2 baby.
2 baby. Your babies
Yes,
were wounded?
This my neighbor is die too.
What is she saying, doctor?
She's saying, I am suffering actually. Don't let me suffer more.
Do you have painkillers for her?
No, we have no painkillers for her. She lost her baby because of the shortage of medicine and this. It affects everybody, and she is screaming because her baby has died.
What's going to happen to this kid, doctor?
I think that he's going to die in a day or 2.
حتى فلوس ما عد واحد ياخذ المستشفى. ابوها ريال كبير وعنده 10 نفرات. معوقة رجليها وديها.
I mean, I can't do nothing for them because, you know, it's very difficult.
10 عندي.
So they ask for your help?
And I can't offer the help. And that's it, I mean.
And this is another one, huh?
Yes?
This baby going to die also?
Of course. He's going to die in maybe in hours. I mean, this is another kid who is suffering from malnutrition and actually unnourished. And look at him, he can't, shout because he have no enough energy. And he is, of course, going to die again in 2-3 days.
So he's trying to cry.
Yes, but he couldn't.
Put the tapes in my sock, and, well, sorry, my mother's telling me that I better be next to the microphone, thanks. Put the tapes in my sock and snuck them out of the country. And you told the story of how we arrived at NBC with this report. It was scheduled to go on the evening news, and 3 hours before, I was brought in and told that it was not going to be broadcast, and I was fired. So I was standing down in Rockefeller Center, down by where that nice skating rink is, and holding the tape in my hand and wondering what I was going to do. Well, over the past 13 years, every time I had had some scoop on, CBS used to call, and they used to swear at me. You son of a bitch, how come you're with that third-rate network? Next time you have a report, you bring it over to us. And I never went to them because NBC was always very loyal and would be the only place that would broadcast it. But I figured, I'll call them up. So they said, come on over, show us the tape. So I showed it to them, and they said, this is amazing. Nobody knows about this. We're going to broadcast this tomorrow. It's going to be the lead story on the evening news. Welcome aboard to CBS, and glad to have you on the team. And they were going to send over one of their senior producers the next morning to just help edit a couple of things, and we're sitting around and the guy never shows up. So I started to get worried. I call up and I ask for the president of CBS News, the guy that had approved this, and they said, oh, you didn't hear? 2 o'clock in the morning, he got a phone call and he got fired. And it was just clear to everybody in the news business that this tape was not going to be seen in the United States during the war, and it wasn't. It was broadcast all around the world, and we got all sorts of nice prizes and stuff like that, but there's more than one part of reporting. I mean, there's out getting the story, but if nobody gets to see it, and you're just chopping down trees in the forest, we failed. We did not do our job as reporters because we never brought this story and these pictures in front of the American people, and nobody saw it. Luckily for us, I mean, we blacklisted at public television now, blacklisted at commercial television. There really weren't a lot of places that we can go, and luckily for us, we had come to the attention of HBO and Sheila Nevins at HBO, and they began broadcasting our documentary every year and a half. We really wanted to do a documentary about this current war in Iraq. And we didn't know how to do it. We thought maybe we want to do something about military medicine, because there were supposed to be a lot of advances in military medicine, and we would see the heroism of our soldiers, but we would also see the reality of war if we did something about military medicine. And so we had a list of around 20 different places in Iraq that we wanted to go to. And the only way we could do this was to embed within the Army. And I said, well, she said, I can't embed within the Army. They won't let us film anything. They're just going to lead us around like this. The embedded process during the first Gulf War was a farce, and I didn't want to waste my time. And they said, well, that's the only way you're going to get in. You better embed. So we embedded with lots of trepidation, wind up in Baghdad, and we're at the main Army hospital in Baghdad, and in 15 minutes, the first helicopter comes in with horrific casualties on it. And in the course of the first 2 days, I saw 4 amputations. Now, by this time, I had seen lots of people die. I'd never seen an amputation. And unfortunately, I've forgotten some of the people that I've seen die, but I'll never forget watching an American soldier get his arm cut off. And we could have chased all over Iraq to try to understand the commitment and the heroism of our troops and the horrors of this war, but every 15 minutes the helicopters were delivering it, and it never stopped. And so here's an excerpt from that program It's called Baghdad ER.
We just had 2 more American soldiers come in killed. I purposely have not counted how many deaths, people I've prayed over. It's just, I don't know, it would overwhelm me. I don't think I could, it would just be too overwhelming.
Time when you couldn't take pictures of coffins, when there was an attempt to control the images coming out of the war. And I want to say that there was only one time when I was stopped from filming something. There was an Iraqi prisoner of war being led down the hallways, and I got really excited. He was in an orange jumpsuit, and he had funny goggles on his head, and I got really, I'm going to take his picture, and I almost got tackled. Because I was breaking the Geneva Convention. You're not allowed to take pictures of prisoners, but there wasn't any other time that I was stopped from filming anything. There wasn't any time that we got anything less than total cooperation on the part of the military. Christine Edwards was the public affairs officer at the hospital, and was just terrific in letting us do our work, and we're always going to be grateful for that experience. And for all the people that say that that there's something wrong with the embedded process, we've never had that experience ourselves. We've always been able to film whatever we wanted to film. We haven't been spun. And perhaps I think it's because there isn't anybody who understands what war is like better than the people in the military. And I think they want the American people to know what happens when we send them off to war. And they enabled us to do this. Now, when we came back, the part of the embedded process is that your film gets reviewed. And normally it gets reviewed by a public affairs officer. There's a 72-hour courtesy period in which they can make comments. You don't have to follow the comments, but you have to listen to what the Army has to say. And our courtesy review was in the Pentagon with the head of the Army and all the top generals in the Army. And at the end of the program, a Marine dies on camera and they wheel his body out. And then the lights come on, and I didn't know how the generals were going to react. And one by one, they began saying that they thought that this film honored the commitment of the military and it showed the reality of the war, and they were proud to be part of it, and they hoped that as many people saw this as possible. But there's one person in the room who didn't seem happy. And this was the only civilian in the room, who was the Undersecretary of the Army. And a week later, the president of HBO gets a phone call from the Secretary of the Army asking him to cancel the show. And this was at a time when there were telecommunication bills going through Congress, where wording this way or that way really affected the fortunes of a multinational communications company like HBO. And to HBO's credit, I can't tell you exactly what the president, I know what he said, but I'm just not going to say it here. He basically told the Secretary of the Army to go to hell and hung the phone up. And they broadcast the show. That was the first time that that ever happened to me. And I'm very proud to have been associated over the years with HBO, and I really respect the courage that they had in that particular incident. I can't say it's been a perfect marriage because sort of an ornery and getting ornery and older independent filmmaker, the things that I think are important don't necessarily coincide with what big multinational corporation thinks is important, and there's been times when we've kicked each other in the shins pretty hard. But we've got 2 new shows coming on HBO. They've given us a home when nobody else has, and it's been a nice marriage. After years of poking into other people's business and looking in their refrigerators and filming things that are very, very private, I began to feel a little bit self-conscious that I was maybe disingenuous and that I didn't have the courage to do what I had asked thousands of people to do. And at that time, our family was in the middle of a crisis. My father had become quite ill. He was suffering from a very painful disease. He wanted to die. And I thought that even though it was very personal and painful, that other families could learn from the experience of our family. So we had a family meeting, and we decided that we would make a film about how we as a family dealt with my father's illness. My brothers and my mother were all part of this. And it was the toughest program that I ever had to make, but it's one that I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of my dad because he was my hero, and I.F. Stone was his hero. And so I'd like to give my dad the last words. And the things that he says at the end of this clip are the things that have always guided me and my family.
Darling, I am growing older. Silver threads among the gold.
Anybody who's been living on this planet should try to leave it a better place than when they first came here.
I think that's what I.F. Stone was trying to do. I'm very humbled and honored to accept this award on behalf of my family, and I thank you very much.